Click on the subscribe button, especially the bell on the right side. Otherwise, you will miss the latest videos.
Okay, so we'll get a little bit into the transit at this point. Yeah, let's discuss the transit, and then before we get into the other planetary dignities, we'll take a short break. But I hope that analysis on all of these different aspects of Mercury karma are very helpful in understanding all the different manifestations of how Mercury influences our karma, and then what we can kind of do to work with those vibrations, what we can kind of do to work with those energies. Now, Mercury entered the Jupiter-ruled sign of Sagittarius on November 24th, 2017. Mercury retrograde, because Mercury became retrograde on December 4, Mercury retrograde will transit back to Scorpio on December 11, 2017, so in 5 days. So even though we are currently Mercury Sagittarius, because it's retrograde, on December 11, it will go back into the Mars-ruled sign of Scorpio. By the way, Mercury retrograde will end December 23, so right before Christmas. Mercury will become combust, and we'll talk more about the combustion of Mercury in a little bit, but Mercury will become combust, which means very close to the sun, on December 8th, 2017, so in 2 days. And we'll talk about what that does. And the Mercury combustion will end on December 19. So again, when we look at the condition of Mercury improving, we're looking at the combustion ending on December 19, and we're looking at the retrograde ending on December 23. Now, once the retrograde ends, then Mercury will be traveling in the normal direction and will enter Sagittarius again on January 7th. Okay, and it will remain in Sagittarius until January 28th. So the current position of Mercury in Sagittarius, we will have in and out of this vibration until January 28th. And at that point, the Mercury will go into the Saturn-ruled sign of Capricorn. So when Mercury enters the Jupiter-ruled sign of Sagittarius, it creates a mixed effect. Mercury and Jupiter are considered enemy planets, and therefore this alignment carries some challenging vibration. Now, some astrologers believe on certain degrees, Mercury in Sagittarius is neutral or friendly. So it's not like it's very inauspicious. It's not like, even though these planets are enemy, Mercury does okay in Sagittarius. But Mercury is debilitated in the Jupiter-ruled sign of Pisces, and there's a reason for that. It has to do with Mercury and Jupiter's relationship. So basically with this vibration, when you get Mercury and Jupiter together, you are going to get, it's going to be more auspicious in Sagittarius than it will be in Pisces. But there will be some challenging vibration that come with that as well. And we might all be experiencing this because of this transit, but those with Mercury in their natal Sagittarius, they're going to be feeling this on a much stronger level as this is the time of their Mercury return. The key challenge of this alignment comes from the differing karmic natures of Mercury and Jupiter, because Jupiter, which is called Guru in Sanskrit, is the representation of spiritual wisdom and faith. Okay, so let's just associate that with Jupiter, wisdom and faith. Now, Mercury, which is the emblem of intelligence, is the representative of the buddhi, which includes the logical, rational, intellectual, basically our common sense. So you're taking faith and common sense, okay? Now, ultimately, if we can come into a balance between faith and spirituality and logic and common sense, then that is a beautiful gift. But these energies are inherently different. These energies are apparently opposing. We can't understand, even though this conjunction will try, that it is somewhat challenging to try to understand spirituality using the logic. That is why I mentioned the word faith. In other words, faith and logic, they cannot really coexist. Because faith means believing something beyond logic. Faith is having trust in something. Faith is knowing something at a spiritual level, but maybe not being able to prove it. And common sense or logic says, if you can't prove it, it's not real. So basically these vibrations, we'll talk about their positive effect, but because Jupiter and Mercury relate in this way, it can be a tough time for the balance of spirit and intellect. Now, on the positive side, the alignment of Buddha in Sag will encourage powerful and passionate speech because of the fire vibration of Sagittarius. And Jupiter usually has something very meaningful to say. Now, the speech will be oriented towards the Sagittarius vibration, which is about the protection, equality, freedom, and fairness for all living things. So you find yourself, if you look in the news right now, there are people speaking up. There have been negative things that have happened to them, but that were unfair. Now they are speaking those things. They are bringing those things that were hidden to the light so that they are true. One of the things that's very common in America right now is that women were in the 1990s and the 1980s were sexually abused by different celebrities. And now, because of this Mercury and Sagittarius vibration, and also Saturn's in Sagittarius, which is bringing them some punishment for their misdeeds. But the Mercury in Sagittarius is saying, okay, well, now there's a communication going where all of this stuff is getting brought to the surface, and there's a real energy being focused on civil rights for women, fairness for women, and how, what used to happen and how that there's no place for that kind of treatment anymore. So again, this is part of that Mercury and Sagittarius vibration, is there is a strong amount of communication which is oriented to the protection of others. When Mercury enters Sagittarius, Buddha becomes a messenger of ethics, morals, and truth from the Jupiter vibration, and makes sure these principles are communicated with enthusiasm and power. So if something is unethical is happening, if something unmoral is happening, there will be a large amount of communication about it at this time. Also, this conjunction is inclined to lead vigilante justice, either through action or communication. What is vigilante justice? That means you take the law into your own hands. Okay, I wrote this on the positive side because if you use communication to take the law into your own hands, basically, if there are some injustices, then this conjunction will seek to use the communication and the intellect to bring justice. So if there is someone who has committed a crime, this vibration will seek to have them get punishment for their crime. So this is a very strong vibration in that people are going to be wanting to discuss people's truth and bring these things to the surface, and then also justice. Now, the action-oriented vigilante justice is not good. If someone does something wrong, if someone does something immoral, we should not go and beat them up. We should not go and attack them. On a spiritual life, we are to practice ahimsa, nonviolence. This type of vigilante justice is not encouraged. Never take things into your own hands physically with someone who has committed an injustice. Because of the Mercury in Sagittarius, use your intellect. The greatest way to win, you can win a battle with your fighting, with your physical, but you can win the war with your mind. So this is the sense here that you want to win the war and not the battle. And to win the war, you have to use your intellect. So this is, again, yes, you will be oriented to bringing justice to those that have who have committed injustices, and you want there to be fairness and equality for those that don't have it. But use your intelligence to make a difference. In other words, use your mind and not your anger. Basically, if there are unkindnesses, that those with this vibration are going to want to correct that. We call this calling out. So you're at a special time in which people are going to be calling other people out. This means that if someone does something wrong, they're going to, that is immoral or unethical, they are going to be exposed. Now, on the challenging side, the alignment of Buddha and Sagittarius will encourage a challenge for others to hold their tongue, because Mercury communication and then Jupiter Sagittarius is a very fiery communication. So this means that people maybe will be aggressive in their speech, even though their communication will be coming from a place of truth, morality, and ethics. Nonetheless, battles must be chosen wisely. And again, there's this analogy here between the battle and the war. You cannot win every battle. If you try to win every battle, you'll never win the war. So of what you're choosing to communicate and what you're choosing to speak, the battles must be chosen wisely. So if you're getting into a communication battle with someone, that the battle must be chosen wisely. Now, this conjunction indicates this person to always speak their mind. As long as it's not retrograde. If it's retrograde, they will speak their mind, but there will be some shyness around it. Now, so they'll only speak it to people they're comfortable with. So whenever, because of Mercury and Sagittarius, whenever they notice something that doesn't meet the current standard, then the communication seeks to speak it out. So basically, this aspect we talked about with Mercury, where it attaches itself to the flaws, well, this is kind of focused on this area and really speaking out against it. But even though one can speak out and lead by example, in other words, one might be vulnerable to speaking and not holding their tongue. But as we talked about, the most important thing that you can do to improve your planetary karma with Mercury is lead by example and embody these ethics and words in action. But still, they might be prone to notice and criticize others. So we're at a time where the intellectual energy is criticizing other people's morals. So you have to be careful. You should really lead by example instead of criticizing the deeds of others. How are you enjoying the webinar so far, Madhurji?
Wonderful. And I'm just going through the charts in my head, and every line, every statement you have made, it's absolutely getting tallied and absolutely correct.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. So let me get back to the webinar. Okay, great. Is it back on, Madhurji?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So first thing I would like to say is we can't really know the specific energy of Mercury before we look at the planetary dignity. So it's actually essential in really understanding how the karma is manifesting. Yes, we talked about the general aspects of the karma and even some subtle aspects of the karma like humor and socializing. But there is a signification that depending on the position of Mercury and its dignity, there's a profound signification as to the message, as to the power and the auspiciousness of the relationship. If the planetary dignity with Mercury is poor, it shows there's a lot of room for growth in terms of how to improve our planetary karma with Mercury. If the planetary dignity with Mercury is strong, then it's something that we know is a gift, and we really have to focus on this aspect of our gift. Now, Mercury is exalted in the Mercury-ruled sign of Virgo. We have to talk about this because Mercury is the only planet which is exalted in its own sign. There is no other planet which is exalted in its own sign, unless you believe that Rahu is exalted in Aquarius. Then maybe. But basically, there's no real vibration here in which, and also Ketu could be exalted in Scorpio. You could consider that, but not generally. Now, Mercury is exalted in Virgo, but depending on the degree that Mercury sits, it has varying auspiciousness. So there are 3 levels of dignity. All of these levels of Mercury in Virgo are good dignity. Now, the exaltation of Mercury is only within the first 15 degrees of Mercury. Okay? And the highest exaltation point is at the end of that 15 degrees. So the strongest Mercury possible is Mercury at 15 degrees. But anything between 0 and 15 degrees is exaltation of Mercury. Now, if Mercury is past the 15th degree into the 16th degree through the 20th degree, that is a Mula Trikona. Mula Trikona is a form of exaltation which is about 80% exalted. So it's about 100% exalted from degree 0 to 15, and then 80% exalted in a Mula Trikona from 16 to 20 degrees. Also very strong, very powerful. And then even past the 20th degree, into the 21st degree to the 30th degree, this is the portion of Virgo which is the natural sign of Mercury, or its own sign. And so this is a powerful position for Mercury. We can call this about a 50% exaltation. So depending on the degree of Mercury, it's either 100% exalted, 80% exalted, or 50% exalted. But all of these positions of Mercury are great. Mercury aligned to Virgo creates a very auspicious and beneficial vibration. Mercury Virgo's inherent karma is that of purification, and we really talked about that when we got into the Mercury webinar portion of the karma. Now, this purification process, it observes the weaknesses and faults and removes them, while also observing the gifts of strengths of something and emphasizing them. So these people that have Mercury in Virgo, they see the good, the bad, and the neutral about everything. Whenever they are seeing something, they are automatically analyzing it. They're analyzing all of the parts that are bad, all of the parts that are good, and all of the parts that are average, and no, they don't have a choice. Mercury Virgo is able to see the absolute ideal, most favorable or improved version of anything. So in this process of the intelligence, they can see, I often describe this as Virgo can see the way things can and should be. Okay? Now, the one side of it's positive, the other side of it's negative. Seeing the way things can be. This is an inherent gift of the Virgo Lagna, which means you're able to see the potential of something. And this is Mercury in Virgo, this is strong. You're able to see the potential of something. You're able to see the gifts of something. You're able to see all of the positives and the good aspects of everything. But automatically, because Virgo thinks that it can be this way or that it can be improved, they automatically think that it should be. Should be is the more challenging vibration of the Virgo Lagna because should is biased. Should is subjective. And just because it should be according to you doesn't mean that that's right for somebody else. And so this vibration, on the positive side, you see the way things can be. But on the challenging side, there might be some bias there, and you might feel like you'll be seeing the way things should be. So just something to play around there with those that have strong Virgo energy. Now, Mercury Virgo is able to see the absolute best version of things, and this allows them to strive for this quality. So because they're able to see the best version of things, they strive to bring things to that state. Now, on a challenging side, this can create perfectionism. Because when you're striving for the best version of something, when you're striving for the ideal version of something, well, another word for that is striving for the perfect. And nothing about life is ever perfect except God. So everything else about life is imperfect. So striving for perfectionism, I guess it's a nice idea, but it ends up being unbalanced. And depending on if Mercury's exalted or just in its natural sign, if Mercury's just in its natural sign, this is actually more inauspicious in terms of there being a high inclination to perfectionism. Those with exalted Mercury, yeah, they're really striving for a high ideal, but sometimes they can keep that within a certain balance. And they can also differentiate between can and should be. Yeah. Now, it can create a hyperactivity in adamant nature. And adamant nature here is when you're striving for the way things should be, then that is like, oh, well, this is the way things should be, and I'm right and everybody else is wrong. This is, again, another challenging vibration that you have to be careful a little bit with Mercury, Virgo. But again, less so in a complete exaltation versus just a natural sign. Now, those natives with Mercury and Virgo have strong service-oriented karma because Virgo is the sixth sign. It's associated with service. From a spiritual perspective, we call this seva. And it's also associated with the energies of the sixth house, which is the house of service. So there's a strong service orientation when Mercury is in Virgo. This doesn't mean that you're being of service spiritually, although that's the most positive manifestation of it, but it could also mean that you're providing a service, like offering some type of business, because Mercury also has to do with the Vaishya class or the merchant class. So there's the selling of goods and services that are also part of what I mean by service. Yeah, so that's a little bit about the Mercury exaltation and natural sign and Mula Trikona, which kind of all fall into position in the sign of Virgo, depending on the degree, will variate its auspiciousness. Now we'll talk a little bit about the debilitation of Mercury. I talk a lot about the debilitation because I often think that a debilitation can be misunderstood, because automatically when we hear a debilitation, there's a misconception that that is negative. There's a misconception that that is something that is going to be automatically negative. But some of the most intelligent people had debilitated Mercury. My favorite one to mention is always Albert Einstein. But basically, let's not just assume that because it's debilitated, it's negative. Let's say that its expression is unique, and let's look at how that expression manifests. So Mercury is debilitated in the Jupiter-ruled sign of Pisces. The cause of this debilitation, as I mentioned earlier, of Jupiter and Mercury, because of Mercury in Sagittarius, that's a kind of neutral position. When you get into the Mercury with Pisces, that's a debilitated position. In other words, there's no sign that Mercury is more uncomfortable. Now, Jupiter, as we mentioned, is the planet of spiritual wisdom, and Mercury is the planet of intellect. So again, we're coming with this conflict, and this conflict is stronger with Mercury Pisces than Mercury Sagittarius, because Pisces is the sign which represent faith. Pisces is the sign which represents wisdom, which is psychic, which come from heaven. And there is no way to understand this aspect of life logically. In other words, when you're looking at Albert Einstein, for example, his knowledge of his genius as far as math, it was actually coming from heaven. It was actually coming from the divine realms. This wisdom, it was something that was connected to his intuition, which is coming from a higher place. and yet he tried to understand it intellectually. E equals mc squared. And ultimately, this knowledge is not even, he described what is indescribable with math. Anyway, this is just, I like his example because it kind of shows how the logic and the spirit can become one. Because he brought that that intellectual knowledge into a spiritual place. So this is very interesting. But these energies are somewhat opposing. Again, the debilitation on the challenging side can create a conflict between the logical aspect of their consciousness and the spiritual aspect of their consciousness. These natives can often be confused when it comes to decision making and whether to favor faith-based spiritual intuition or with what logically makes sense. So basically, when it comes to making decisions, they become trapped. I don't know whether to make the logical decision or the spiritual decision. And because they don't know how to make a decision, because they're not sure which decision to make, the logical or the spiritual, they end up making no decisions at all. And so this can be a challenge in decision making because of the conflict between the logic and the spirit. And so ultimately, faith and logic, like Albert Einstein, must be integrated for these natives. That you must, yes, it is a challenging karma that you have to understand this aspect through logic, but these opposing gunas, these opposing energies, in order to fully improve the karma, they need to be balanced. So ultimately, to know if you have a debilitated Mercury, on some level, your faith and logic are attempting to come together. If you can work on this, it will be of a greater quality to the life. Ultimately, though, faith and logic must be integrated for these natives. But the karma itself creates trouble balancing these dualities. So as mentioned, these energies need to come into balance with each other. But if we choose one or the other in an unbalanced way, it can cause a lot of negative aspects. In other words, if we choose logic without the spiritual, then there is negative consequence. If we choose spiritual without the logical, it's possible there will be some consequences as well. There's an old saying that you should that if you have the ultimate faith, sorry about that. Birthday. So if you have the ultimate faith, then the logic isn't necessarily necessary for a part of that, but basically there should be some logic with the faith. The saying is, yes, it's good to have faith. So if you go into in old times, if someone had a horse and you went into a shop, you would tie the horse outside. But some people were saying, oh, well, I have complete faith, so I'm just going to leave my horse untied. They would leave their horse untied, and then they come back from the shop and the horse is gone. They say, oh, well, I had faith. And no, because this is faith, but where is the logic? You have the individual who went in there with faith and leave their horse outside have no common sense, and really on some level is lacking intelligence. So basically what you want to do is you want to have faith but also tie your horse up. So you want to have faith but you also want to use your logic to, it's actually a real combining of energies, and you never want to just abandon one for the other. So on the positive side, it can show a certain type of intelligence which is connected to the spirit. Although these natives might be it might seem like they're communicating from a place of logic, like how Albert Einstein communicated with math, but these natives might be communicating from a place of logic. It might seem that way, but underneath that initial layer of reason might be some type of wisdom which is coming from a higher source. So even though it might be manifesting, you might be receiving that message as a regular, logical, rational message. That underneath the layer of that rational message is spiritual wisdom. So it's also bringing spiritual wisdom into the intellectual message here. This alignment of Mercury in Pisces inclines the native to focus solely on where their intuition is inclined. Okay, I call this intuitive ADD. So those with Mercury debilitated have what you call intuitive ADD, attention deficit disorder. Basically, if the native's intuition, or what we call the sixth sense, is inclined towards something, they will be able to put an incredible amount of focus, intelligence, and study towards it. For example, Albert Einstein's intuition was inclined towards math. Okay, so if your intuition is inclined towards something, you will have an incredible amount of energy to put towards that. You couldn't take Albert Einstein away from a chalkboard for hours and hours when he was on a roll. It's because his ability to focus on that, which his spirit was inclined towards, is extremely powerful. On the other hand, if the native's intuition is not inclined towards something in particular, their ability to assimilate, understand, and focus on the material will be challenged or debilitated. So those with the debilitated Mercury, they often do very poorly in school. Why do they do poorly in school? It's not because they're not smart. It's because their intelligence is only going to be attracted to what their spirit is inclined towards. Therefore, if they go to a regular college and they have to take all of these requirements, well, if their spirit is not inclined to those requirements, they will do very poorly. This shows an inability to focus on something that you're just told to study, that you're told to focus on. And these people, when they're told to do something, especially studying or learning, there's no ability to do well at it. They actually have to be inclined towards learning from their spirit, from their intuition. So otherwise it will be debilitated. And so sometimes this can manifest in what, for people with Mercury debilitation, you are very smart in one or a few areas, but less than average smart in most. Okay, so you might be more smart in a very specific area, but less smart in other areas. Because basically, you're only smart where your intuition is inclined.
This is very, very true. Very true.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of the people who are have debilitated Mercury do the best scientific work in one area.
Yes, right.
So now we'll look at some of the different dignities as well to understand the different messages and the different manifestations of Mercury karma. Now, Mercury has auspicious dignity in the Mercury-ruled sign of Gemini. The buddhi, or discretionary factor of the consciousness, is powerfully emphasized, prioritized, and empowered. And so basically those with Gemini and Mercury, the buddhi, the analytical, discretionary, intellectual part of our consciousness, is extremely important and a big part of who we are. Now, particularly with Mercury Gemini karma, the buddhi's power is concentrated as a diverse and external manifestation. Basically, for Virgo Mercury, the buddhi is can focus on one specific thing, because the buddhi is more linear for Virgo. But the buddhi is more spread out for Gemini. Therefore, the buddhi manifests in a diverse amount of manifestations instead of just one specific. This is why the energy of a jack of all trades, master of none comes up with the Gemini vibration, is because the intelligence is not just concentrated on one specific area, but is spread out over many different areas. It's manifesting in an external way. Therefore, those with Mercury and Gemini are extremely knowledgeable in a diverse array of areas, categories, avenues, disciplines, traditions, cultures, and methods. So they really have diverse knowledge. So they have a diverse amount of knowledge. So knowledge of many, many different areas. And their intelligence manifests greatly over these many different areas, and therefore are given an ability to be efficient and productive at a diverse amount of tasks and responsibilities. In other words, Gemini, Mercury, these people are hyper capable. They are pretty much capable of doing anything well. Basically, there's a deep well of diverse knowledge, which also supports a diverse and rich skill set, which allowed these natives to be good at varying applications and tasks. So again, this knowledge, this intelligence, this buddhi, it's spread out wide, it's spread out externally, and it really gives the individual a diverse and rich skill set in many different areas. And so this challenge that comes with this incredible gift of buddhi is deep knowledge and capability in a diverse well of applications and tasks. So that's the incredible gift, is this deep well of knowledge in all of these different areas. But it can also prevent the ultimate mastery of one thing in particular. So you're getting a trade-off. You're trading off being very good at very many different things for being the best at one. Okay? And it's a karmic trade-off. It shows that you will be extremely knowledgeable and capable in very many different areas, but you might not be the best chess player in the world, or you might not be the number one in whichever thing that you're doing, but you still might be in the top 10 of 10 different things. Yeah, it's a trade-off in which you are gifted to be knowledgeable in all of these diverse areas, but limited in your potential of one. This is why for these individuals, their inclination to diverse areas is the most important. Because if you keep focusing on one, it could be like going up against a wall. You need to diversify that knowledge. Now, Mercury has very auspicious dignity and karma in the natural Venus-ruled signs of Taurus and Libra. Because Mercury and Venus have a positive planetary relationship, so they get along very well. This is due to they work synergistically. So when these planets are conjunction in a chart, often they are working together. Now, when these planets of Venus and Mercury are working together, and so people who have Venus-Mercury conjunction in their chart or a Venus-Mercury aspect in their chart, intelligence, communication, and expressions become more sophisticated, refined, and hold greater value. So those Venus vibrations of sophistication and refinement, they really get brought into the communication and intelligence. And this alignment creates a great value and worth to the intelligence, communication, and speech. And so whenever these Venus vibration and the Mercury vibration are combined, there is a great value to our intelligence, and there is a great value to our speech. It's important, and it's worth a lot. It has a lot of power, and that it's rich. Now, when Mercury aligns to Taurus, and someone might find this familiar, it allows the individual to have a good economic and material sense. They are inclined to have good intelligence as it relates to finances, investments, spending, and their career. These natives are also inclined to accumulate savings and success and prosperity in their varying fields of work. The challenging energy of this conjunction is that it can cause too much mental focus and obsessiveness towards money and the material world. In other words, too much of the brain is thinking about the material. And so these natives are vulnerable to an over-prioritization or an over-emphasis on the material reality. Okay, so they have to be careful about over-materiality. And so those with Mercury and Taurus are subject to have success in working with numbers, finances, expensive materials, beauty, art, music, and entertainment. Now, when Mercury aligns to Libra, it supports a vibration of creative communication. This allows the intelligence and message of the individual to be inclined towards art, music, entertainment, and therefore these natives have a unique creativity. So I really like this as far as the creative conjunction. These individuals seek balance and harmony through their speech. And so their speech can be very harmonious and pleasurable to listen to. And often their words can have a creative or beautiful way in which they are expressed. Sometimes these people are really enjoyable to listen to. They're very romantic and sensual in their speech. So they can sound sultry if they're a woman, or kind of, handsome if they're a man. And this gift of beautiful speech, kind and harmonious speech, is strong here. So these people, they're really beautiful with their words. The challenge of this vibration includes a lack of linear expression, and sometimes an overemphasis on romance, pleasure, and entertainment. So these people can get caught up in the pleasures of life, and they can, because they're so attracted to the more Venus vibration, sometimes the Venus vibration can act as a distraction from their intellect. So they could be like distracted by the pleasures of life as well. Mercury has a unique mixed dignity and karma in the natural Saturn-ruled signs of Capricorn and Aquarius, okay? Now, from a traditional perspective, Mercury and Saturn are friendly karmic relationship, which means these planets work together. But whenever Shani is involved, there's going to be a mixed karmic effect, even if the planet that it's working with is friend, because Shani's karma can be malefic. Saturn's influence as Shanaischarya means that delays, obstacles, and adversities can be involved. And so there's a positive exchange of energies with these two vibrations because they're friendly planets that allows for a well-calculated, well-organized, and well-delivered speech. These are people with the potential to really take their time and calculate what they're saying, and because of that, what they're saying being even more powerful. In other words, taking the Saturn energy, which is discipline, and putting that into the speech. And so really taking time and energy and organization before you were to communicate something. So this can be a really positive energy in terms of these people can have a really powerful communication things to say, as long as they're patient enough to let them really be processed. The general challenges that come with the Mercury-Saturn relationship is that there's a delay or obstacle in logical understanding and intellectual expression. So because of the Saturn influence, there's some kind of challenge as far as the intellect and communication that shows up. When Mercury aligns to Capricorn, these people very often have communication and intelligence as a key aspect of their life and career, subject to the house position of course, but the 10th sign is Capricorn, which has significations would have to do with the 10th house as well. This also creates a strong vibration that one's evolution as far as intelligence and communication, so the evolution with Mercury is a slow and steady process. So whenever Saturn is involved, our evolution with Mercury is the turtle and not the hare. So it's a real slow and steady process. These individuals are usually extremely intelligent. Mercury Capricorn people are smart, but also at times in certain areas are considered slow learners. They might be slow learners, but when they learn it, they might know it better than most people. They may take more time to learn the material, but that material is more integrated throughout the education process. So it's also something that they have integrated throughout the education process. So on the positive side, this conjunction has a strong support for great success, prosperity, and achievement if intelligence, service, or communication-oriented careers. So if the intelligence and the communication are part of your career and you have Mercury in Capricorn, you will usually be very, very successful. And often those with Mercury in Capricorn are also good politicians, if there's such thing. Now, on the challenging side, these conjunction can cause delays, obstacles, and adversity in one's career path, learning, personal expressions, and communication. And so sometimes with those with Mercury in Capricorn, there is some challenge in their intelligence or expression earlier in their life, which means it can be something that they grow out of, but it's possibly earlier in their life that they will have a learning disability or a speech impediment. Okay, like a lisp. Now, when Mercury aligns to Aquarius, these natives are very unique and innovative in their intelligence and consciousness. Mercury is an innovative planet. Aquarius is an innovative sign. So when you get these vibrations together, very innovative. They are very often inclined to technology because technology and innovation are close. And they have a way of being in alignment with what is the most advanced in terms of technology at any given time. So usually those with Mercury and Aquarius, they'll have the iPhone 10, they'll have the PlayStation 4, they'll have the iPad, they'll have all of the new technologies, and they'll have a good understanding of them. They'll also know how to use the internet. They'll also know how to use social media. These people are very good with technology, and they're usually as advanced as far as what technology is representing. They may even be inventive in their nature, which means they can actually create innovation and technology themselves. These individuals are extremely perceptive and very concerned with a balance of what is rational and ideal. So this is similar to a Virgo Mercury vibration, except it's kind of more outside of the box. These individuals are able to use their speech and intelligence to gain unique opportunities in their given field of expertise. The 11th sign is Capricorn, which is associated with the 11th house, which is the house of gains. So often those with Mercury and Aquarius, their intelligence and communication gives them wonderful opportunities. These natives also have a very unique sense of humor and are usually very funny. It's kind of a mix between what we call dry humor, which is associated with Saturn, and wittiness, which is associated with Mercury. So this kind of dry wit is kind of very funny. It can be a little sarcastic, though. And these conjunctions allow for the logical to be integrated with the ideal. And therefore, these natives can find themselves as inventors and creators. So it's good if they have a hobby that allows for invention and creation. And this conjunction works especially well in fields of technology, social media, politics, public relations, and the sciences. So now we'll get into the Mars signs a little bit. And Mercury's going back into Scorpio, and Mercury's Scorpio in my natal chart. So this is also significant for me. Now, Mercury has neutral dignity and mixed karmic effect in the Saturn-ruled signs of Aries and Mars-ruled signs of Aries and Scorpio. Mars and Mercury do not have the most auspicious relationship. You could think of the student and the general. These energies are often not that in alignment. The general doesn't want to learn, and the student doesn't want to fight. So these vibrations are somewhat of a challenge to each other. Now, similar, as I mentioned, the bond between a professor and a war general. What do we really have there? Now, it can manifest in a positive way when our messages and our intellect are put into action, because Mars is the planet of action. And so those with Mercury-Mars karmas, it emphasizes that they need to walk the walk even more so, because it's actions which are going to speak louder than words. In other words, for Mercury-Mars people, their words are powerful, but their actions will ultimately speak louder. Now, when Mercury aligns to the vibration of Aries, it encourages a powerful and fierce expression of words. Usually these natives with this conjunction have an expression which is encouraging and supports and motivates and empowers. So it can be a very motivational communication. These people are great motivational communicators. They make great life coaches and stuff like that because they are very motivational in their expression. They're great supporters of others. This conjunction is auspicious for confidence in speech and expression. These people have a lot of confidence depending on the position of what they have to say, and for the individual's actions to have logic and reason and intelligence behind them. So it's possible too, the actions, because of the aspect of Mercury, the actions can have a lot of thought, can have a lot of intelligence behind them. On the more challenging side, though, those with Mercury in Aries can sometimes be confused between an instinctual action and that which makes logical sense. basically impulsion and logic. So often those with Mars, Mercury in Aries, they are impulsive. And sometimes that impulsiveness gets the better of them, and they forget the intelligence. So sometimes they can be acting out of an impulsive or instinctual place. This confusion can create inaction, laziness, and blocked expression because of lack of decisiveness. So when you're confused between whether to take a logical action or a instinctual action, then again, this can cause you to take no action at all. And usually there will be some aspect where Saturn might be aspecting the Mercury Aries that kind of shows that indecision here. Now, when Mercury enters Scorpio, it encourages a powerful intellectual curiosity. Those with this conjunction often find their intellectual energy and buddhi attracted to their curiosities. And generally, due to the Scorpio vibration, these natives' curiosities are somewhat unique in their nature and outside of the box in their expression. Those with Mercury and Scorpio communicate passionately and intensely because this is Scorpio, very passionate. And usually their expression can be felt on a visceral and a physical level. These natives are oriented towards scientific or logical understanding because of Mercury of the mystical, spiritual, esoteric, occult, medical, and ancient. So they want to use their intellect to understand these really outside of the box things. Therefore, these natives are powerful communicators and messengers of the mystical, occult, and medical knowledges. And my Mercury is in Scorpio in the 10th house, and my knowledge has always been attracted to spirituality, mysticism, reincarnation, moksha, astrology, Ayurveda, all different religion, all of these things which are kind of the Mercury Scorpio vibration. And because these planets are in the 10th house, which is my career, well, then that's kind of the astrology, which is that it's my career to communicate this kind of esoteric knowledge. Now, Mercury has neutral dignity and mixed karmic effect in the sun-ruled sign of Leo. Some Vedic philosophers believe the relationship between the sun and Mercury to be favorable and auspicious one, but it very much has to do with the degree if you have a Mercury-Sun conjunction. Now, Mercury symbolizing the message and the sun representing the soul. This can be a very positive conjunction. When conjunct, this carries and expresses the soul's message confidently, courageously, and with great power. So the sun in the right amount of degree in separation from Mercury gives power to the communication and gives power to the intelligence. And Lord Parashara says that it gives brilliance. Now, therefore, Mercury in Leo, which carries a similar vibration because Leo is ruled by the sun. But when someone has Mercury in Leo, the position of the sun is very important. So you also have to look at the position of the sun with Mercury in Leo, because if it's combust, that could cause all sorts of other aspects as well. It carries a similar vibration. So when looking at whether Mercury in Leo or Mercury-Sun conjunction is favorable, you really have to just consider the degrees of separation. So we're really trying to, anything that Mercury is 11 degrees or more away from the sun is more auspicious than if Mercury is 10 degrees close or closer to the sun because of the combustion. Now, when Mercury enters Leo, it supports the fulfillment of our power and leadership karma in this life, dependent on house position, of course. And it allows one's power and soul fulfillment in this life to be achieved through intelligence and discrimination. So you're meant to use your intelligence and communication to rise to your full power and potential. And so it supports the message itself to be one of strength, power, and inspiration. And that usually those with Mercury and Leo can be very inspiring in their communication. They can make you feel like a leader too. And hopefully in full alignment with the soul's direction and dharma, which is going to come from the sun. So positively, this conjunction brings confidence behind your speech and a powerful strength of your intelligence and a really profound message which can reach to influence the masses and create inspiration. This auspicious effect is dependent on the house position and whether Mercury is functionally benefic or combust. And the challenging aspect of this vibration can be overconfidence. It can be sharp speech. There can be high ego, closed-mindedness, and an overly analytical or critical nature. So even though this manifests as a great power, if it's not balanced properly, it becomes unhealthy ego. Mercury has a neutral dignity and a mixed karmic effect in the moon-ruled sign of Cancer. It's an interesting conjunction. It has some favorable qualities as well. The moon considers Mercury its friend, while Mercury considers the moon its enemy. So this is a very unique kind of karmic relationship in which the moon is very like, oh, Mercury is great. And, you know, considering the story, that's very, you know, the moon is the parent. So, of course, but Mercury might not care so much for the parent. So this means from one perspective, the relationship is beneficial, but from another perspective, a challenge. So that's why this is a mixed karmic effect. You're going to get an auspicious effect from how Moon relates to Mercury, but a challenging effect from how Mercury relates to Moon. Now, Mercury Cancer combines the intellectual qualities of Mercury with the emotional qualities of the moon. And when we talk about these different conjunctions, it's the intellect combining with what? With the Jupiter, it's with faith. With Mars, it's with action. With Saturn, it's with discipline. Here, it's with the emotion. With the moon, it's with the emotion. This creates a powerful effect in which one's intellectual aspect and emotional aspect are inseparable. This is why it's particularly challenging because logic and emotion are very different energy. But here, logic and emotion are connected. So there's a very strong emotional connection to one's logical understanding of things. These people are deeply emotionally connected to their knowledge. Therefore, emotions and logic are brought up together. And because of this, when one uses their intellect, there are usually deep emotions and feelings present as well. On the positive side, this conjunction can have a nice balance of emotional and logical qualities. And also their writing or expression, their words or writing can be deeply emotional and felt on an emotional level by everyone who reads and hears the natives of expression. Let's say you're reading the book of someone who has Mercury in Cancer, the book will make you cry. Let's say you are watching a movie of someone who, the director has Mercury in Cancer, the movie will make you cry. It will make you laugh. It will make you dance. Because basically, the person used their intellect to help bring out emotions in the viewer. So there is an aspect here of their communication is emotional and you can feel the emotions which they communicate. The challenge of this vibration comes from over-emotionality. It's a challenge to balance the logic and the emotion, especially when the intellect or logic is present. So another challenge is that sometimes those with this conjunction can be shy or passive because emotion and logic create shyness. And this can be inhibited in their communication. So because they're too emotional, it's hard for them to communicate sometimes. And often due to the high sensitivity and emotionality in the speech and writing. So basically, sometimes they're afraid to speak. They're afraid to share their truth. Why? Because there's too much emotion behind it. In other words, maybe if they were begin to start talking, they would start crying and they don't want to cry. So we went through Mercury and all of the different signs to understand the dignity from that perspective, but there are still two unique conditions of Mercury to understand how Mercury karma manifests, and these are the most common conditions. The first is which Mercury is retrograde. It's very interesting to me that of the world and their general knowledge of astrology, how every single person seems to know what Mercury retrograde is. They might not know what their ascendant is. They might not know what a sun sign or a moon sign is, but they know what the retrograde Mercury. So I always think this is interesting. Maybe it's because Mercury retrograde happens so commonly, but ultimately I think it's strange how much the world knows about Mercury retrograde, but not other aspects of astrology. In any case, Mercury, of all Navagraha, is the planet other than Rahu and Ketu that is the most often retrograde. So Mercury retrograde, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, I think it's given too much emphasis. Yes, it's a retrograde energy, which means it's unique in its manifestation, but Mercury is retrograde months and months and months every year. That means it's not that special. Okay, it happens all the time. So again, there's a little too much energy, I think, given a Mercury retrograde, which is why I waited till now to explain it. But it's important to understand how Mercury retrograde is, but it's not like this grand thing that is shocking. It happens all the time. So that is why it is so common. We hear individuals complain of Mercury retrograde in the transit because it's so common. And Mercury's retrograde right now. Initially, when I thought of doing this reading, I scratched my head and I thought, is it good for me to do Mercury retrograde webinar? And I said, yes, it'll be perfect, because during Mercury retrograde, it makes it harder for people to talk, which means that everyone will be listening very good. So this is why I thought it would be very beneficial. But so those with, so yeah, it is normal or familiar for Mercury to be retrograde at times. That's the first point I want to make. The second is that when Mercury is retrograde, it causes the traditional associations and energies of Mercury to manifest its power internally and in a unique manner. So normally Mercury energy manifests externally with speech. But when Mercury is retrograde, the intellectual energy is manifesting internally. So when Mercury is retrograde, that's what's actually happening on with the buddhi. Normally the buddhi is focused outward, externally, but here the third eye, the buddhi eye, is looking internally. It's internal, which often means the people with retrograde Mercury are not less intelligent. It is just that they are more intelligent inside than they are when they express it. So oftentimes their intelligence is greater than it can be expressed in words. So these people with Mercury retrograde are very smart, but that intelligence, it's not always going to manifest with speech. Because of the retrograde, it usually does not manifest with speech. Now, traditionally, Mercury manifests its power through intelligence, discrimination, and communication. Intelligence traditionally has an external manifestation, which is speaking or speech. However, because of the Mercury retrograde, the intellectual energy and the buddhi will not be expressed through speaking alone in a common intellectual manner. So those with Mercury retrograde, they're not the intellectual speakers type, although they can be, and eventually if they work on their speech. But it's possible that their communication or intelligence will be expressed stronger in another method. This is due to the fact that the internal discrimination and understanding is greater within the individual than when it is attempted to be expressed with words and intellectually. So often those with Mercury retrograde, when they try to say what they feel, it does not come out the way they would like. And so when everything is Mercury retrograde, it makes us harder for us to communicate, because what we are trying to say, it is harder for it to be communicated with words alone. Those with Mercury retrograde usually find that the intellectual energy is strongest manifested in an unusual or non-traditional method. Since speaking is the most common form of expression for Mercury, when retrograde, the more alternative expressions of Mercury are favored. This includes writing as being the primary. So often people with Mercury retrograde, they can communicate better in writing than they can with speech. And that also their intelligence not only can manifest strong in writing, but comedy, poetry, creative expressions, theater, art, and music. So although it might not have manifest strongest with speech alone, which is common, it has a greater power to be expressed stronger in some of these more alternative ways, like writing and art, music, entertainment, and comedy. Mercury retrograde karma encourages the native to work with their intellectual energy in a unique way. Mercury retrograde does not necessarily mean that the individual is not a good speaker. But if they are focusing their intellectual energy towards words and speaking, then often the communication is also unique and non-traditional intellectually. So they might be a good speaker, but they're not going to be speaking in a traditional way. There's going to be a very unique way in which they are expressing themselves. And so often that communication is not intellectual in its nature. It might be powerful and significant, but maybe not necessarily intellectual. Now, of course, you have to look at the sign of Mercury too, to look at the intellectual power and its communication to see, okay, well, if Mercury's in Virgo, these people, or Mercury's in Pisces and retrograde, these people love to speak. So it has an indication that you can still speak, but that ultimately it might be possible that your intelligence is best expressed in alternative ways. Those with, they have a very interesting way of speaking, and that while it might not be grammatically correct, it can still be very powerful. So as far as the communication with speaking, it might not be, valedictorian type speech, but it can certainly be something very powerful and moving. There's just an example to conclude the Mercury retrograde to kind of explain. An American artist named, he was the artist formerly known as Prince. He just passed away in the last year. He did the song Purple Rain and Little Red Corvette. But basically, I was looking at Prince's chart, and he had Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde, one of the greatest musical artists, has Mercury retrograde. I thought, this is very interesting. As I looked more into it, I began to listen to his speeches, his interviews, in which he would get interviewed on TV after or before his musical performance. And he could not speak. He whispered. He talks like this, and you can barely hear what he's saying. And he was shy and soft-spoken. But then when it came to his music, it was loud, it was expression, there was sexual energy, and it was powerful and all of this energy. But when it came to him speaking, he talked like this, and you can barely hear him. So he's a perfect example of this energy, which his intelligence and his expression, when manifested creatively, was one of the most powerful things. He won Grammy Award. But he could never do an interview. This is just the nature of Mercury retrograde. Now, when Mercury goes into combustion, this is when the Mercury and the Sun are within 10 degrees of each other. The most intense degrees of combustion occur when the Sun and Mercury are 1 to 5 degrees of conjunction. So this is the most harsh conjunction of Sun and Mercury. Now, when Mercury or Sun are less than 1 degree of separation, it creates an alternative auspicious effect. This effect can be best understood as Mercury being so close to the Sun that they become completely unified as one energy. At this level of conjunction, the soul, the Atma, and the intelligence, Buddha, are connected at a very deep karmic level. So even though the combustion of Mercury is inauspicious, if the combustion is less than 1 degree, it is very auspicious, because then these planets are combining in one force. Now, Mercury combustion in degrees 2 to 10 of separation causes some of the energies of Mercury to get burnt up. As Dr. Vasant Lad likes to say, Mercury gets burnt, roasted, and toasted. That does not mean that the tradition associations of Mercury are not strong. So because Mercury is combust, it does not mean that you are not intelligent or do not have good communicating abilities. That's not what Mercury combustion is about. It just means that at times, when that intellectual energy or buddhi is being used and activated, that there is a strong vulnerability to being burnt out. As Dr. Ladd likes to say, burnt out, roasted, and toasted. This means that when the intelligence is being used, if it is used without balance or with too much rajasic or pitta type energy, that it will eventually lose its strength and power for some time until the condition can recover. So as an astrologer, I have a combustion of Mercury. My Mercury and Sun are, I think, 3.5 degrees of separation. So when I'm doing reading, I do one reading, and after that reading, I feel a little bit tired. If I do a second reading that day, by the end of the second reading, I am completely burnt out. My brain feels like tired, I need rest, I need nap, I need time to recover. So basically it shows it's not about the strength of the intelligence, but the endurance of it. So the Mercury combustion relates to the endurance of intelligence. And if the intelligence is used too strongly, it will need time to recover in a state of combustion. So for example, after this webinar, I can't do anything intellectual the rest of the day.